Thanks for introducing us, and welcome everybody to this afternoon's session. As Maria mentioned, we've got some great panelists, and so I'm just going to ask each of them to join us in turn. First of all, I'm going to ask Britt to join us and to introduce herself, and then we'll move on and ask Ali and finally Giorgio to join in. So Britt, if I could just ask you to say hello and let us know a little bit about yourself first.
So hi everyone, my name is Britt Paris. I am a professor in the Library and Information Science Department at Rutgers University in New Jersey in the United States. I am joining because my research focuses on, among a few other things, audiovisual evidence and sort of epistemic cultures online. I wrote a report in, I guess it's been 6 months ago now, about deepfakes and cheatfakes. With the subtitle, Audio and Visual Disinformation. So I'm happy to be here.
Fantastic, thanks very much. And next we've got Ali. Ali, could I ask you to step up and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're involved in this topic?
Sure, thanks Alex. Good afternoon everyone. My name is Ali Tehrani. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Astroscreen. We are a London-based startup that was founded in 2018, and we detect social media manipulation, which is also known as Astroturfing. We're particularly focused on how we can make social networks a safer place, and we're focused on how people exploit the design flaws of existing platforms to amplify certain narratives and suppress others.
That's great, thanks a lot. So finally, we've got Giorgio, and Giorgio, if you could step forwards, then we'll let you do the same.
Hi, Alex, and thanks CogX for having me at this panel. Giorgio Patrini here. I am joining in from Amsterdam. So I am one of the founder and CEO of Deeptrace, which is a cybersecurity company that we started a couple of years ago with the mission of detecting and monitoring abuses and weaponization related to deepfakes and more in general synthetic medias online on the internet. If I can say also that on camera, I also have a past as an academic. I used to do research in machine learning and generative models between Australia and here back in Amsterdam.
Great, thanks a lot. So we've got a topic here which I think is of interest to everybody because of its potential impact on society, and of course the political situation being what it is. One of the concerns that people have about deepfakes and astroturfing is whether it has a genuine impact on the way the rest of society actually acts, whether people's votes will really be influenced. And I guess the question I first want to start out by asking our panel is, does anybody really buy this stuff? Do members of the public really see a video and believe that, you know, that politician is really that politician and that she really said that? So I wonder if anybody has an opinion about how effective these technologies actually are at swaying the minds of individuals. Go ahead, Brett.
So I guess I could kick it off, and I have, you know, a couple of questions. I've read a couple of things from my co-panelists. So there has been a lot of work within various communities, political science, sociology. There's an academic, Daniel Kreis, who, you know, does a lot of research on epistemic communities and shows that people will believe anything that fits within their already existing sort of ideological worldview. So like, you know, while, you know, that video of Nancy Pelosi, you know, slurred speech from last summer wasn't a deep fake. It wasn't made through, you know, deep fake, sophisticated technical methods. You know, it's still sort of ramped up and gained a lot of traction within communities who already believed and already would believe that, you know, Nancy Pelosi would be drunk on national television. So I'll say that, and I'll begin with that. There have been a couple of other instances lately from Gabon and Malaysia that I know that my co-panelists know a little bit about, and I'd like to talk, hear from them in terms of, you know, how efficient those supposed deepfakes were in, swaying the public or, sort of manufacturing belief in those things.
Thanks. Maybe we could turn to Giorgio, who I'm sure will have an opinion about that.
Yeah, I think Britt actually raised a great point. I think psychological biases are maybe an element that is even more relevant to discuss than merely technically speaking, the photorealism. So as is natural, with this new technology coming in the place and in the hands of potentially of malicious agents, what we wonder, first of all, is is the technology already up to the game to actually convince people, even if we can see, particular bleaching in the faces, or sometimes, those videos are not as realistic as we may talk about, but the people can still see that there are, mistakes and glitches on video. So I think that actually is maybe not the main concern that we should focus on in the discussion, because psychological bias on one hand, but also on the other hand, other elements that maybe are more important than the quality of the videos are where those videos and those material are actually shared and by whom, and also in a way when. So if you're talking about polluting political discourse around election time, I think it doesn't really matter if a video is so convincing, speaking about a pixel level, if that face really look like the person that maybe somebody wants to impersonate and defame. But it's more about is this a social media profile having many followers, and therefore has the potential to show this video in one clip to millions of people. And what if this is spread just the day before election, a few hours before the end of the election? Those I think actually are sometimes underestimated as element for really executing an attack with those type of media. So deepfake, I think in this case in particular, when we talk about misinformation, this will be a secondary element, as Britt has been working on and has been writing extensively about it. Deepfakes could be as powerful if you want to do harm over social media, and even more as was introduced to this case of Gabon from last year. It's been a while now, but in this case in Gabon, the president at the time, Ali Bongo, was supposed to be in a deepfake video, or that's what people thought and believed on social media, on Facebook and YouTube. There were lots of comments about this video not really looking realistic, even if with all likeness at the end it turned out to be a real video. That actually didn't matter at the time for running a different thesis, regardless of what was the fact, if the recording was legit or not. So it's really about how these messages are amplified and by whom in some cases, not really just the technology that created them, in my opinion.
Okay, super. Thank you. That's really helpful. And Ali, do you want to chip in, or shall we move on?
No. Britt raised a really interesting point. And I think just as a thought experiment to show, kind of double down and show this in reality, if we just imagine you're in a parallel universe and it's 2015 and you're a Russian operative, intelligence operative working for the GRU, and for whatever reason your objective is to get Hillary Clinton elected, and for Donald Trump to lose, and you're going to create deep fakes to discredit Trump so that he loses the election. I don't think in your wildest dreams you'd be able to kind of come up with a creative, credible deep fake that would be more damaging than the actual real video and audio that was leaked, numerous of which were leaked, namely, most famously, of Donald Trump boasting of him inappropriately grabbing women. And he still won, right? So we don't live in a fact-based society where the best candidates or the best ideas win. People vote based on their political beliefs, and everything else is confirmation bias. So I actually think that the use or the fear of deepfakes being used to deceive in politics is completely overblown. And I think the biggest fear, I do think that this deepfakes are damaging for politics, but not to deceive. I think it's damaging, namely because we're entering this kind of wave of information warfare called mimetic warfare, where people use memes as a way to propagate narratives. So if we don't live in this fact-based society and we're entering mimetic warfare, firstly, deepfakes are a fantastic way of creating memes. Secondly, and this is what concerns me, who is the best, which online communities are the best at using and creating deepfakes? It's communities that spend most of their days kind of creating deepfake pornography. It's communities that are on 4chan or alt-right subreddits. So if mimetic warfare is becoming really important, and memes are a really good way to win political discourse, what worries me is that the people most proficient at creating these memes using deepfakes are not people that we want to control the narrative, and they're not the people that we want to kind of define what the window of discourse is. So that's what concerns me, other than instead of this traditional fear that deepfakes are going to be used to discredit a candidate.
Okay, well, thank you. That's a helpful segue, in fact, into the next question, which I was going to ask, which is about the significance of deepfakes in pornography. Unpleasant though it is, not only is pornography still pervasive, but in fact, deepfakes seem to be one of the most widely applied sort of technologies in the new pornography era. And if the people who are producing fake porn are the people who are leading the vanguard on perpetuating memes, then clearly that's a big problem, because we're starting from a bad place. So, I mean, is anybody going to be able to do anything about this, is my question. This seems to be a largely unpoliced area. We can scarcely say it doesn't matter, and yet it's hard to see how it's going to be improved. Would anybody like to tell us how they think this situation can be improved? Please, Giorgio.
Right. So I think you actually raise a good point in terms of this is an area that is really not policed, not controlled. And very often when this is the topic on why this is the main area of interest of application of deepfakes, people just refer to the fact that most of the time new technology are applied to the industry. While this is not, this is not wrong. I think we are minimizing the reason why this is the case in this occasion. In my opinion, what is happening here is indeed so the creation of fake pornographic material through deepfake is essentially not happening in an underground community whatsoever. So maybe this is a misconception that people may have if they know something about this. It is actually quite easy, unfortunately, to find the communities that are either marketplaces for buying or asking for somebody to create some sort of this sort of material, or downloading and using technology in order to produce it, or simply publishing and sharing it in a video platform and so on. Those are not. This is not something that is happening underground, like in the dark web, as it might be for buying stolen credit cards detail, password and email accounts, or drugs or anything like that. This is very new that the technology can do that. Maybe we can talk about. We've been talking about this for maybe less than 3 years now. So this is still pretty new, and I don't think in terms of legislation we are up to the game in actually try to outlaw this type of activity. And therefore, there is no reason for these actors, those malicious actors, and those communities to form and create at the surface of the internet. In my opinion, this is one of the main reasons why this is so widespread. They actually wanted to advertise those services because they are making money out of it, essentially exploiting the image of mainly women, not only but mainly women, without their consent to create and sell and advertise on top of this material. So I think a necessary first step would be actually the recognition that this activity is illicit, as it might be stealing a credit card numbers. Although I understand the sensitivity of the content is very difficult, but the fact is we are not treating this as a criminal activity today, except very, very few and sparse legislation around the world most of them that are doing maybe a good job are actually countries in Asia, like South Korea has been very strong against it. In the European Union, I actually don't know much of this happening, unfortunately. So second maybe element here is, even if that happens, so if we are ready to criminalize it, I don't think, of course, it's going to be the end of it. There's always going to be since there is a financial incentive to create those type of media for whatever reason, there is going to be somebody doing it and trying to sell it, maybe hidden, maybe somewhere in an underground community. And in that case, I see in the future these type of markets moving somewhere else where they are harder to find. But that's not so dissimilar for what happens in other industries that are related to security, cybersecurity. You will see, our researcher will do research on where those actors in the community talk and what they're doing, what is their incentive. Try to understand early on, as soon as possible, what they are trying to do, what is the next attack, what is the next exploit that they are planning, who are their customers, and try to gather intelligence, try to stop them as soon as possible, and also contact and interact with any stakeholders so that might be interesting to know that somebody's creating a video about them, about their business associate, about their government, and hopefully stop them before that happens. So I think those are essentially what I envision as the future in this area. I think first of all, we need to put a stronger message. These activities are not illicit, but then this is going to be an ongoing game, as it is for any time in information technology. When you would see an attacker trying to exploit a system illicitly, there's going to be a back and forth, unfortunately.
Right. Well, that's a constant in these situations. Anybody else jump in?
Yeah,
Ali?
yeah. Just to add on that point, I actually have a really pessimistic view on this area. Firstly, in the West, we don't have the regulation to kind of take into account deep fake pornography. Current regulation around the moderation of these online platforms was built in the 90s, namely Section 230, which allowed kind of the internet to flourish. It basically says online platforms have the right but not obligation to moderate. They're not liable for the content on their platforms. So that doesn't really take into account deep fake pornography. Although a lot of platforms are using legislation around non-consensual pornography to kind of use deep fake pornography to grandfather deep fake pornography in. But even if we catch up in the West, then there'll just be international regulatory arbitrage. These criminals will go to a jurisdiction that doesn't have the same legislation. And the problem here is the legislation that we do have, things like DMCA, they were designed for essentially Hollywood media conglomerates. And if you're an individual victim of deepfake revenge pornography, you won't be able to burden the cost of monitoring these platforms and ensuring that they comply with the DMCA takedown request. So I'm pessimistic of our ability to kind of get rid of this problem. Where I am optimistic, though, is that I think that once the initial novelty of deepfakes and deepfake pornography fades away, they will really lose their potency. Imagine if there were, it's more or less like a bell curve where the x-axis is kind of the damage done and the y-axis is the number of deepfakes that exist. I think we'll get to a point where there'll be so many deepfakes and so much deepfake pornography that at that point you will no longer be able to distinguish real pornography and real nudes with fake pornography and fake nudes. At that point, even if your real nudes are leaked, you could just say, hey, those are deepfakes. So I think there'll be a societal change, and that is why I'm optimistic that long term this won't be a problem. But I'm not very optimistic in the short term we'll be able to get rid of this.
Okay, clear enough. So, Britt, apparently it's all going to be fine, and we don't need to worry about it because it's all going to go away, huh?
Very long term.
Well, so I just wanted to add a couple of things. My colleagues did a very good job of sort of outlining or underlining the sort of the field of legislation. But I wanted to highlight that, this is not anything new. If we think back to, the development of, photography, video, the introduction of, image-based, or what do I say, visual possibilities and the ability to spread images online. The spread of images that are used to harass, humiliate, and intimidate women of color in particular, has been around for a long time. And I see this really as a progression of that tradition. At the same time, both of my colleagues mentioned that there are some sparse policies in place. I have helped give some comments on some of these policies in the US, but I think as Ali mentioned, having these specific policies in place in various states as they exist in the United States really don't get at the problem of the sort of global spread and the, sort of rapid speed at which these, content of all types, but deep fakes in particular is the object of conversation here. Really doesn't address how these spread, and it really doesn't, add any sort of meaningful policy in the way of, legislating these appropriately. They do use in California and in a few states, there are some sort of very specific there's specific ability to punish individuals who are spreading deepfakes, both pornographic deepfakes and other types of deepfakes that are meant to impugn the political process or the electoral process. They punish individuals who are spreading these, but they don't really do anything. They can't really do anything about holding the platforms accountable that really profit from the speed and the scale at which this content proliferates. And, we have the ability to punish people based on, identity theft statutes or cyber stalking statutes or non-consensual pornography statutes. They have made it possible, I think, in California to make it, what do I want to say? To allow people who are the victim of a sexually explicit deepfake to sort of go through an expedited process to, go through court and hold the producers accountable. But I want to highlight also that this process of arbitration takes a lot of money and a lot of time. And a lot of the time, unless they're, famous figures or public figures, people, just regular everyday people, women, women of color in particular, LGBTQ individuals, people don't always have the resources at their disposal to fight something in court. So a lot of the time, I think these sort of individual regulations or the individualized policies that exist really don't help that much. So I guess I'm just adding my voice to the choir here and saying that the policies that we have aren't really enough to deal with, the issues of pornography. And
it sounds like you don't think they're just going to go away in time, as was suggested by Ali.
I think, maybe they won't go away in time. I think he also suggested that they won't go away in time, but they'll become sort of more socially, we'll figure out a way to deal with them socially. We'll be able to take advantage of what Bobby Chesney and Danielle Citron call the liar's dividend, or, the ability to both exonerate oneself from culpability by saying, oh, whatever it was a deep fake, or to produce a deep fake to, sort of reify some sort of lie that someone's telling. So, I think that over time, unless, something drastic happens that I really can't see on the horizon, I think that sort of normalization in social practices around normalization will be, sort of what happens.
Okay, thanks. And Giorgio, you were going to add something else?
Yes, I want to cue in on the good point on essentially, even if some law have been passed or some specific law like for example, related to revenge porn may be applicable here. It's still in the hands of individuals, both on the side of following with legal actions, but at the same time also in terms of who is going to be potentially convicted or asked to take down content is at the end of the day the creator or the publisher, but not necessarily the broadcaster, meaning a social platform or a video platform that is on the internet. For what I've been talking about before with Ali in terms of freedom of expression, which in the United States is essentially for social platform is identified with Section 230. So the point here is that there are exceptions to this legislation that has content specifically related to terrorism, incitation of violence, or child exploitation, and so forth. That which those companies that are merely broadcasting the information that users put on their platform, they are responsible for, and therefore they need to act timely and at their best possibility, technically speaking, to take this content down. So I don't see necessarily, I don't think that the platform are completely free of responsibility for the moment, for the time being, for the legislation as is. They probably are, I would agree, and that's a hard problem. Some of them are acting independently, try to bring up and implement their own policy. But I think also from the point of view of the legislator, maybe this new category of type of media that are so abusive of people could be included in something that their companies, their social media platforms should be responsible for as well.
Okay, and we actually had an audience question, which is somewhat related to this while I've been going along. Question from Matthew about whether the way the advertising payment industry works could actually be part of the problem here, and whether changes to advertising regulation or banning advertising personalization could remove some of the financial support for people producing this kind of content. Anybody care to chip in?
As far as I'm aware, they don't monetize these, and Giorgio might know more, but they don't monetize these deep fakes through advertising. They actually, people commission the creation of these deep fakes, so they're paid precisely to create a single deep fake video. So and also the advertising networks that if they are using advertising networks to monetize deep fakes, they are advertising networks that aren't the mainstream advertising networks like AdSense or Facebook. They are designed specifically for gambling websites and online pornography websites, so they're not going to be very compliant here.
Right. It's the old problem that the problem with criminals is that they won't obey the law, and so it's kind of hard to persuade them to change. Okay, maybe we could go on and just talk a little bit about the meme side of things and so-called astroturfing. So, the use of social media networks to propagate ideas, not just videos, not just picture material, but actually ideas and ways of thinking. Do we think that the trends and the implications in astroturfing and meme-based idea propagation are really any different from those for video? Or we talked earlier about confirmation bias. Maybe actually people just respond to ideas they're already sensitized to in exactly the same way when we're talking about text. Ali, I know this is your particular domain. Maybe you go first.
Absolutely. So earlier I said that I don't think the use of deepfakes in politics is as big of a problem as we think, especially when it comes to deceiving or discrediting a candidate. One area where I do think it's highly damaging is deepfakes basically manage to exploit the design flaws of these platforms. So these platforms from the very beginning were designed with very simple KPIs, namely, how do we increase daily active users? How do we increase monthly active users? Essentially, how do we increase engagement? Because engagement means clicks, clicks means eyeballs, eyeballs means advertising revenue. So these platforms were created from the very beginning to maximize engagement, and they reward content that is engaging. And what's usually engaging, it's what's biased, polarizing, controversial. And unfortunately, kind of deep fakes in addition to these design flaws of the platforms, create the perfect storm. Deepfakes, almost by definition, are designed to be controversial and polarizing. And they don't necessarily have to be malicious. So let me give you an example. After the Mueller report, Donald Trump retweeted a shallow fake, I guess you'd call it, a shallow fake of his face superimposed onto Superman. And this video was had mass appeal and was widely shared. And one reason was that Donald Trump supporters were sharing it, obviously. But the second reason, I think the major reason, was that detractors of Donald Trump were replying to the video or quote tweeting the video to make fun of it or to fact check the video. And these algorithms that are designed to maximize engagement were unfairly rewarding this video. So I think where deepfakes kind of add to the problem of astroturfing is that deepfakes are designed to exploit the vulnerabilities of these platforms. And since we live in this post-factual world, if all that matters is distribution versus factual content, then posting deepfakes is guaranteed almost to give you the widest reach. So that's one area that I'd be concerned about.
I wanted to jump in and just talk a little bit about astroturfing, just because it's something that's commonly misunderstood. And, it may be different than what we're talking about here even, but I just wanted to get a little clarification or maybe have a little discussion on this. So astroturfing to me usually is like, a sort of powerful organization is trying to mask that it is actually putting out a message and making it look like it's a sort of grassroots, campaign. But when in fact, it's just a sort of, this happens a lot with maybe bots or, sort of diffusing messages through a base. But I think a lot of the time, what we see within social media and the way that these sort of misinformation campaigns start is that it is sometimes, actually a grassroots effort. Nobody's trying to sort of play off that they're, hiding, their identity, or, it's not always sort of the Koch brothers, paying for a bot farm or something like that. Often it is, just everyday people who, make a sort of concentrated effort to get their oftentimes political opinion to sort of achieve massive speed and scale through social media. And so I just wanted to ask Ali, maybe, is that what you're talking about, or do you have a different definition here?
No, I think
I just wanted to play with that a little bit.
No, I think we have the same definition. I just jumped the gun and answered the question of how do deepfakes kind of play into astroturfing. So astroturfing, the definition I think is very similar to what you said. It's essentially, astroturf is fake grass, and then astroturfing is fake grassroots movements. So it's creating the impression of fake popular support, where that support doesn't necessarily exist. And traditional offline astroturfing was to handwrite, thousands of letters, send it to your congressman, pretending it's from 1,000 different constituents, and it was really hard to do. All that social networks allow to happen is they allow that to happen at scale. So rather than handwriting 1,000 letters, you create a few thousand fake Twitter accounts. But the goal of these astroturfing campaigns is ultimately to move beyond the existing, the initial 3,000, 4,000 fake accounts. It's really to get mass appeal. And how they do that is essentially they use that 3,000 accounts to kind of kickstart a campaign, a hashtag to trend on Twitter. And then once it's trended, thousands of real people get to see it. And then the news writes about it. So the goal here is to kind of kickstart a fake movement and then fool people into thinking that that's how everyone else, that's what the opinion of everyone else is. What I was trying to say earlier with deepfakes is that deepfakes allows that to happen much quicker, because deepfakes are much more it's much easier to get that critical mass with a deepfake than it is with a tweet. So it's just giving that kind of perfect storm.
Okay, nicely clarified. Thank you. So we've got just a bit less than 10 minutes left now. So just wanted to move the conversation forward a little bit further. So we've heard a lot of negativity and grounds for pessimism. I just wondered whether we might be able to try and address the positive. Surely all of this ingenious machine learning-based image generation technology, and indeed technologies for getting messages across to large numbers of people, possibly rallying people to causes in a good way, could actually all be used for good. And I wondered if anybody would care to voice some opinions about how these technologies might actually be used for good and what some of the positive benefits might be. Don't all shout at once.
Sure, I can go. So if you imagine what the entertainment ecosystem looked prior to YouTube, a few major media conglomerates basically had a monopoly on content creation, and then YouTube came about, and it basically democratized distribution. So now any person could build a massive following online and become a content creator, and that was fantastic. There are now tens of thousands of influencers, although it's easy to dismiss them as kind of doing trivial work. There's now tens of thousands of content creators that are entertaining and creating positivity for the world. So YouTube did that for the distribution of content, and I'm really optimistic that deepfakes will do the same thing, but on the content creation side. So right now, if you want to create a really highly polished movie, you need to have tens of millions of dollars, highly sophisticated technology and skilled people to kind of create that content. But deepfakes will really lower the barriers for content creation and allow anyone to create content. So then all that's required is for people to have great ideas. So if you combine, the distribution of YouTube and then the ability of deepfakes to create anything, I think that's really positive for the world, and it's going to open up the world for a lot of creativity.
Okay, that sounds encouraging. Please, Britt, yes.
Yeah, I think following on the tails of that, this is something that I've written about a lot, or sort of thought about a lot, which is, this issue of the barriers to entry and making, sort of democratizing, the ability to create content. I've talked to people within the film industry that say, this sort of spells the end for a lot of entry-level jobs in filmmaking. But, maybe it opens up a sort of second space or alternate space where people who would be working as, journeymen within the film industry can create their own stuff with fewer barriers to entry. So I will sort of back up that point there. And I think a lot of the backlash that we're seeing with deepfakes is about this question of the barriers to entry and who has the ability to create content that is so persuasive. But aside from that, there's also a lot of beautiful art. There are people like Mario Klingemann and I think Gene Kogan is his name, who make, wonderful artistic projects using not necessarily deepfake technology, but generative adversarial networks that sort of undergird a lot of deepfake technology. I encourage you all to go look at their work. It's great and very beautiful. Also, there is the argument that you can create some sort of palpable public service announcements in the mode of the one that Jordan Peele created with the Obama deepfake back in 2018, I think in the spring of 2018. That helps people realize, that, deepfakes are here, they're real, they're, fairly believable if you don't know what you're looking for, and that you should, it's sort of a call to engage in some sort of media literacy around, being able to, just sort of visually detect a fake video or a deep faked video.
Right.
So yeah, I'll say that. I think there are a couple of more applications, but I'll let Giorgio speak.
Well, thanks. And I mean, we're coming down to the last 5 minutes, so I do have one more thought. If anybody's absolutely burning to chip in, then now's the chance. Otherwise, I just wanted to actually switch back to a question from the audience. I wanted to wrap up with something that might help everybody here. You're all experts. How can we tell what we're looking at is fake? Have we got any tips? Or another question asked by another audience member was, actually with generative adversarial networks, is there now no chance? Should we just kind of give up? Should we take the optimistic view, the liar's benefit, denial works on the positive side? Any quick tips for our audience about what they should be looking out for, or whether to just try and accept that, it's not a thing?
I can start with this. Maybe the disappointing answer is you shouldn't look at the content at all. If that's what you're trying to do, try to realize that the content is fake. Your best friend will be context. So what I will look into is understanding where this content is coming from. So who shared it? What is the response from other people to it? Is this something that is extremely sensational, very unexpected? Maybe the person that is featured in the video is saying something that probably they would not have said in the past. It doesn't really match with the history. Those are red flags already. So something sensational that is going viral on social media. The reason why it is actually even dangerous to give guidelines, in my opinion, on what to check on in terms of content itself, that could give clues to a viewer that, for example, that lip movement is not as fluid as you may see in real video. This is dangerous because this is a very dynamic environment. In a few months' time, the suggestion that we could give to people in order to spot a fake video will not be up to the game in a few months down the road. And therefore, actually convincing yourself that since those teeth have been very well generated, since that person is blinking, therefore must be real, that's not a good learning experience for you as in terms of investment for the future. So may even go against you and convince you of the opposite in the future. So I think a context, if you are doing that job without any technical tool, but just looking on what's happening on social media around the context is the best way, in my opinion.
That's a great tip. Okay, good. And anybody else want to come back on whether we should even bother trying to check things are fake?
Yeah, I could quickly chip in. I've heard there's great companies like Deeptrace working to use AI to detect deepfakes. How we do it at Astroscreen, we don't actually look at the videos. We look at the propagation of that video on social networks. So one way you could do it is exactly as Giorgio said, is this video propagating through a network at a higher virality than other videos that we've classified to be authentic, and then kind of as an early warning system, warning you to, hey, here's a video that's propagating really abnormally. Maybe we should have a second check to see if this is a real video or not, or a shallow fake or not.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that. And Britt, maybe the last word to you. We were asked by an audience member, Rebecca, what would you encourage governments to do to try and improve this situation? Have you got any suggestions about legislation? You mentioned some earlier. It didn't sound like you thought it was really doing what was needed yet.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. These networks, I think the real issue is, the ways in which they propagate across, networks that know no sort of governmental boundaries. And so I think that is the issue. And if governments can sort of join the push, like it can't be a push from governments alone. It has to be from, users and all sorts of service providers and things like that to promote a better sort of ecology, a better sort of social media or platform ecology. And that is a little more easier said than done, let's say. So
No kidding.
So yeah, I think, pushing platforms toward accountability and for actually, being accountable for the massive amounts of money that they're making whenever these videos spread at massive speeds and scales would be a good first step, but doing so, of course, carefully.
All right, well, that's a great way to end. So I'd just like to finish by thanking everybody on the panel. Assistant Professor at Rutgers, Britt Paris, Ali Tehrani, the CEO of Astroscreen, and Giorgio Patrini, the CEO at Deeptrace. Thank you so much. I think this has been a great panel, and we'll be back, so don't go too far. There's a 15-minute break and a bunch of questions already in the hopper, so we'll be running a Q&A session in 15 minutes' time for another half an hour. Hope to see you there.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.